One of the most celebrated of all UFO films is this, shot at Catalina Island in California by professional cameraman Lee Hansen.
It was one of these clear days, and that's why I was up, because you could see to infinity, and it was an ideal day for aerial photography. And it appeared silver with a shadow underneath, as though it was metallic, and it was moving at a rate of speed, I would say 150 miles an hour plus or minus, and appeared to be maybe 20 meters across.
We decided to analyze the Catalina film. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratories in Pasadena, California, every frame is scanned and turned into numbers by Dr. Robert Nathan, top expert in the computer enhancement of photographs. His object is to get the clearest possible picture by averaging the best frames of the film. The first frame is called in from the magnetic tape and repeated on the right-hand side of the screen.
Now there's going to be a series of operations where I'm going to take the picture and start editing it to the next picture. The second photograph is being brought in. Its contrast is stretched, and now it is being added to the first photograph. This picture now represents the average of the two photographs, and we're beginning to see a smoothing out of the background sky and an emergence of various shapes in the object. The third photograph has been brought in. This picture shows the average of all of these three, and now you begin to see an appearance of a strong white image on the top, and there seems to be some holes or some kind of transparency underneath here. One takes a good look at this, and considering that the speed of the object, as reported by Lee Hansen, the photographer, is that this is moving at about 120 miles an hour, this begins to look like a small commercial airplane. And one can draw the comparison that you have the bright wing on the top, the windows, and the stabilizer, the rudder structure, and that's it. The Catalina film, I'm afraid, falls into the category of an identified flying airplane.
Well, I've looked at this film quite a few times, and I'm convinced that it was a small private plane. There's no need to look any further for an explanation. And that, of course, is the trouble with long-range sightings. We can never be absolutely sure what they were. But even if it was a visitor from outer space, we couldn't prove it. For this reason, I'm no longer interested in UFO sightings. But what does intrigue me, what is very mysterious, are the so-called close encounters.
One such encounter happened to Mrs. Jessie Rustenberg, then living in this Staffordshire farmhouse.
It was on an October day, the 25th of October in 1954. I was in the back kitchen of the house preparing myself, just having washed, and I heard this noise. Now, it was just like a giant cauldron of water being poured onto a red-hot fire, but if you can imagine, 1,000 times louder. And my first reaction was the children. I must get out, there's a plane crashing. So I slipped on my jumper, I ran out through the side entrance of the house towards the front garden to look for them coming across the fields. And to my amazement, there, suspended on the top of the roof of this old farm, was this object that I can only describe as a huge Mexican hat. It was that shape without the bubbles. It must have been 15 to 20 yards from where I stood. It covered the roof, so in circumference it must have been about 60 feet. It was enormous. The people in the spacecraft were just looking out. I could see them from the waist to the top of their heads. They were very beautiful people. They had long golden hair, like the old kings used to wear, turned under. They had a very vivid blue like ski type affair on. And they just looked at us. Their eyes, the expression in their eyes were full of compassion. And then, all of a sudden, I felt the tension leaving me, and I felt movement, and I turned round to touch my children, and when I looked again, it was gone. Now, we stood there, and I said to the boys, "Did you see what I seen?" "Yes, Mummy, yes." I said, "Well, where is it? It's gone." And we looked, and my second son said, "There it is, Mum." And we watched it in the sky, just like a cotton reel, circle round the farm 3 times. And then it just shot straight up and away.
But just occasionally, there is physical evidence to back up reports of close encounters. On the morning of November the 9th, 1979, forestry worker Bob Taylor walked down this woodland track outside Livingston New Town near Edinburgh. He rounded a corner and was astonished to be confronted by an unearthly object.
It was a huge thing with a big round dome, a very dark grey colour, and it had a big flange going all the way around. I could see arms sticking out of this flange with what I took to be blades on the top.
Later, he described what he'd seen to a local newspaper artist who drew this sketch.
As I stood here, there was 2 balls came out, 2 balls. I think they'd be about 3 feet in diameter with about 6 spikes. And they were rolling on these spikes. They came right up beside me, and I remember feeling a tug at that time. A very powerful smell, a choking sort of smell, and that was it.
He crawled up this path and staggered home, to be met on the doorstep by his bewildered wife.
It looked terrible when he came in the door, and he just stood at the door, and I said, "Have you had an accident with your lorry?" And he said, "No, I've been attacked." And I said, "What with?" And he said, "A spaceship." And I said, "Oh, goodness me, there's no such a thing as a spaceship. I'm going to phone the doctor. You must have fell and hurt your head." He looked quite shocked, and he was drained. He was right white, and his face was dirty, and he had a red scar here. And his clothes were all dirty, and his trousers. And then he told me his trousers had been torn.
Police station, Bargate.
The police were called, and they discovered inexplicable track marks at the scene of the incident.
On examining the area, I found 2 track marks in approximately 40 holes in the ground. And these are the track marks here, and these are the 40 holes. Since then, I've photographed the holes. This is a photograph of the hole here. This is the holes that measured approximately 3.5 inches. And this other photograph here, you can actually see the tread marks which correspond to the marks here. These markings and tracks were actually inside this area here that's fenced off, and there's definitely no other tracks leading to or from this area.
These are the trousers worn by Mr. Taylor. As you can see, they're of fairly heavy material. We have a tear on the left, just below the pocket, and one on the right trouser leg, again just below the pocket. These marks are consistent with the material having been pulled up while the trousers were being worn.
Well, I'm pretty certain that day that I saw a spaceship sitting here.
We must accept the story of Mr. Taylor. He is a very highly respected member of the community, a man of high integrity, and not one likely to invent such a story.
Personally, I'm convinced that there must be many, many higher civilizations in this enormous and incredibly ancient universe of ours. And since we are preparing to go out into space ourselves, other older races may have been doing this for millions of years. So it's quite reasonable to think that they may have come here in the remote past, perhaps many times, as indeed suggested in 2001. So we should look for evidence of such visits, physical evidence in the form, for example, of fossilized transistor radios or their equivalent. But the question is, are they still coming now? Well, at this moment, we have radar networks, American, Russian, and doubtless others, plotting, tracking everything in space. Anything as big as a pencil in orbit around the Earth can be tracked by these radars. Is it conceivable that we've been having visitors over the last decades trying to sneak up on us, landing in obscure places, being seen by a few people, and not by these enormous tracking networks? I feel that when there really is a visitation from space, it'll be something spectacular, rather like the climax of the movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We'll be certain of it within about 5 minutes. You may wonder, what should you do if you do meet a visitor from space? Well, be very polite and be prepared for a long journey.
Next week, dragons, dinosaurs, and giant snakes.